Hey, if you're a B2B sales rep and you're earning less than $250,000 per year, it could be because most of your deals are getting stuck in the middle of your sales process and they're never closing, and you have prospects that end up ghosting you and they never come back to life. And that could be because of one specific reason: your discovery calls are not effective. So in this video, I'm gonna give you 7 effective techniques you can use to improve your discovery calls so you can close more deals and earn more commission. Let's go. Hi, my name's Eric Fisher, and I've coached hundreds, if not thousands, of sales reps in my 14 years as an account executive for a very large privately held company. And you know what? I'm still an account executive to this day. So on this channel, I teach you the exact techniques, strategies, and tactics that I use to close over $120+ million in sales just over the last decade and hit 12 straight President's Clubs, usually in the second quarter. Now let's get right to today's video. Now, if you've been in sales for a little while and maybe you're more experienced, or maybe you're just getting started, I think we can all agree that an effective sales process is critical to success as a salesperson. And if you think about it, you've got prospecting, you've got discovery, you've got presenting proposals, you've got objection handling, and even closing. And those are all the components that exist within a sales process. And how you execute that sales process is extremely important. And that's where most sales reps struggle, is they don't necessarily have a sales process to begin with, but even when they do, they're using the wrong words, the wrong language, and asking the wrong questions, which causes them to lose control of the deal regardless of what phase it is in your sales process. So in today's video, we're going to talk about several different ways that you can improve your discovery calls so you can take back more control of the deal, gain more access to information so that you can close more deals and close them faster so you can earn more commission. Now let's first talk about why discovery calls are so important. The discovery call, or discovery calls, because there's usually more than one, it dictates our entire path or journey down the sales process. And if it's not effective, you're going to struggle, and that's usually why your deals get stuck later on in the sales process, because you don't have enough of the right information and you haven't actually followed any sort of process. You've maybe just asked a few questions that were very much surface level. And what's really important in discovery calls is you have to continually make course corrections. One big mistake that many salespeople make is they think the discovery process is just a linear process, right? Where it starts here and then you end up closing the deal. And unfortunately, that's actually not the case. Every single deal that you come across, every single customer and prospect, they're all different. And so a really good salesperson not only has the right tools and questions to ask, but they know when to pull out the right strategies as part of their discovery process and apply them where and when necessary with each different prospect and customer that they talk to. Because you're not going to use the same tactics with every customer, because that would be assuming that every customer is the same. So with that said, just be sure that when you're in your discovery process, that you're realizing that it's a continual process and you're going to continually need to make changes as you go through your sales process to continue to gather more of the right information and get more commitments from the customer, and make sure you better understand their position and why they want to make a change, to make sure that they're really serious about the deal in the first place. Now, the best sales reps actually don't make a discovery call seem like a discovery call at all. In fact, if you're used to a discovery call seeming like you're interrogating the prospect and you feel really awkward because of the language you're using that was given to you by your sales department and your sales leadership and said, ask these questions, take them through BANT, take them through MEDDIC. Well, there's a reason why you feel the way you feel, and it's because those questions you're asking and the way you're asking them are very unnatural. The best sales reps make discovery very much conversational. So they don't feel like they're interrogating, because it's very much a collaboration with the prospect, and therefore it's just a discussion and exchanging information and exchanging various questions. B2B sales reps, if you want to build a massive pipeline of business, one like you've never had before, where you're not chasing your quota and you can absolutely crush your President's Club well before Q4, then check out the link down below in the description box. I have a brand new mini course for B2B sales professionals called Sales Prospecting on Demand. It's a mini course. It doesn't take you long to get through. It includes a ton of live trainings, and it's some very key information that you can apply right now to your business if you want to start earning multiple 6 figures per year. There's no other problem that can't be solved with a big fat pipeline. So click the link down below if you're interested, and if you're not and you're doing great, Cool. Let's jump into some tactics you can apply right now to improve your discovery calls so you can make a bigger impact on your customers and start earning more commission right away. The first one that I would recommend is which Gong calls upfront contract, but I would actually call it pre-framing and gaining alignment. Now let's talk about what I mean by this. The first time you actually meet with a customer, before you actually have the discovery call, meaning before it ever occurs, you want to gain agreement about what's going to occur on that call. And so what I like to do is I like to send an email before the discovery call with an agenda, and I like to highlight the items that I'd like to cover in that discovery call, but I also leave a couple blanks for the customer to respond back with what they would like to talk about in our meeting. The reason why this is so effective is that it makes sure that the customer is very much in tune with the call that we're about to have, that they're interested, which is something that we'll talk about later, which is the salesperson doing all the talking and only talking about what's on the agenda that they created, and it's not at all what the prospect wants to talk about. So the first tip we have, gain agreement from the prospect or customer around what they want to talk about and pre-frame the call on what is going to occur so they know going into that call, the types of questions you're going to ask, what it is you want to talk about, and then also what that sales process may look like as you go forward so they know what to expect. When you pre-frame things this way, it puts the prospect's mind at ease because they know what to expect and they know they're going to get asked some questions that they should genuinely have the answer to, so you can make the call more effective in general for both parties, and you can then gain commitment to move to the next step in the sales process. Now let's move on to tip number 2 to improve your discovery calls. Now, if you've watched any of my other YouTube videos, I've actually got a YouTube short, and I'll put the video up in this corner on what I call knowledge stacking. And what knowledge stacking is, throughout your discovery process with every single customer that you interact with, you're gaining and interpreting and intercepting a lot of new information from each prospect about their problems, their goals, and why they decided to move forward or not move forward with certain solutions that are similar to yours. And what that allows you to do is gain really good access to information about the persona in your target ICP, which is your ideal customer profile. And when you really understand your ICP, that allows you to tell really good stories about other customers you've helped or maybe even not helped and how they solved a particular problem. And here's the thing that's so great about this. If you're a new salesperson, and maybe you're even working for a startup, so you don't have thousands and thousands of deals at your disposal to use and draw upon use cases from, here's the thing. You don't always have to have solved the problem. You just have to understand the problem. And so when you leverage storytelling in the discovery process, it shows what's called empathy. Empathy means you understand the problem that the prospect is going through as good or even better than they do. And when you do this, it's super effective because here's why. When you show them that you have empathy, it automatically implies that you have the best solution because you understand their problem at a very, very deep level. And the way you do that is by effective storytelling. So next time you're in a discovery call, remember to leverage storytelling if you want to become more effective, be more convincing and persuading without actually feeling like you have to persuade the person, because they're automatically going to feel like you understand them, you understand their problems, and they're therefore going to feel like you have the best solution without you even having to tell them. Now let's move on to tip number 3. And tip number 3 is you want to get the customers to use very long answers in their responses to your questions. The reason this is so important is that while you're in the middle of a discovery call, you're asking different questions to the prospect and you're kind of firing away down your list of questions like most sales reps do. And the unfortunate part is that if you haven't framed up that conversation properly, the prospect is kind of just reactively responding to your questions and they haven't thoroughly thought through their answers. And so this is why you want to ask really powerful questions that generate very long answers, because what it allows the prospect to do is actually think through their responses and actually talk it out live as you go on the call, and they'll actually formulate a more concise and thoughtful response to your questions so you can better understand their problem. And oftentimes they will put themselves in a position where they're basically going to tell you, hey, you know what? I need help. And based on the responses I'm giving you, clearly my problem is bigger than what I thought it was. Now, here's a few questions that you can ask. Hey, can you help me understand XYZ? Hey, can you walk me through XYZ problem or XYZ scenario? Or can you walk me through your current state? Hey, can you tell me about XYZ? Or hey, Mr. Prospect, talk to me about XYZ. When you ask very open-ended questions like that, They're not just open-ended, but they're very conversational. And when you use conversational questions, you reduce the friction. When you reduce the friction in the conversation, prospects are more honest, they're more trustworthy, therefore they gain what's called compliant. Compliance is all about being honest with their responses to your questions. The more compliant they are, the more they're actually giving you the real information that will help you solve their problem, to determine if you want to move them in, to determine if you want to move them out, or continue working with them to advance them down your sales process to eventually close the deal. All right, moving on to discovery call tactic number 4. This one is one of my favorites, and I learned this from Mr. Chris Voss, who is an FBI negotiator. You've probably read his books, Never Split the Difference, which I'll put right here in the corner of the screen. If you've never read it, please go check it out. He has a lot of great tips that can be applied to sales. So here's the tip. You want to use what's called mirroring and labeling in your discovery call. Now, oftentimes when you're in a discovery call, you're going to ask customers specific questions like, tell me about the last time you were up for a renewal on this specific subscription. Why didn't you renew? Or talk to me about the last time you were in a big purchase like this. What happened? What were the challenges you encountered? And they may respond with something like this. Well, the reason we didn't move forward is just because, the price was too high for us and it was too complicated. So here is how a mirror works. A mirror is just repeating the last few words of what they say. So you might say, price is too high, with an upward inflection. Or you might say, too complicated. And when you do that, it's really helpful in getting the prospect to then further explain their position and the objection they just threw out about why they did or didn't do something. Now, what labeling is you might get to the end of a discovery call and you want to advance them to the next step in the sales process. And you might say, hey, sounds like we've had a really good discussion. You agree that you've got a problem we can help solve and you need help immediately. So can you open up your calendar and let's book a time that we can meet next week? How does Thursday at 10 a.m. sound? And they say, Eric, right now we're just really busy. It's just not the right time. I think we should maybe look at June or July to get back together. Now, a lot of salespeople run into this problem, and you obviously want to not stall the deal and you want to move the deal along the sales process. And this is a fairly common objection. And so when this occurs, what you want to do is label it. And you might want to say, it seems like you have a lot going on, or, it seems like there's more here to unpack. Does it make sense for us to get on a call next week? And then they're going to elaborate further on their position about why it is they don't want to meet. Oftentimes people say things at a very surface level, and it's our job as salespeople to get them to respond and elaborate on their position so we can better understand what the true objection we need to solve for is and overcome. Or maybe it's just something they're throwing up as like a red herring objection, which isn't really that big of a deal. It's more of just a complaint, and it's used to just distract us from the goal of the actual call, which is to determine if they have a problem that we can help solve and if it makes sense to move them along in our sales process to the next step, which may be a demo or a proposal. Okay, so definitely utilize number 4, mirroring and labeling, super powerful, and definitely go check out Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference, one of the best books I've ever read. And if you apply it appropriately, I use it all the time in my sales process, and it's super effective. It worked for him, it'll work for you. All right, moving on to step number 5, you have to be Audible ready. One of the biggest mistakes that sales reps make is they have an agenda, they even have questions. They're very, very prepared, they feel great about the discovery call, and then what happens? The customer tells them something they weren't prepared for based on one of the other questions they asked, and then what? They just ask the next question that's on their list. And this is a huge mistake because it shows the prospect that you weren't listening. Instead, you want to ask more spontaneous questions regarding the point that they just made or the answer they just gave to bring them back to the topic at hand instead of just following your process. Processes are really good, but again, every customer is different and you can't just follow your questions in a linear fashion that you prepared. Instead, what you want to do is you want to ask spontaneous questions. So as you're going through your sales process, you might say something like this. So Mr. Customer, thanks for sharing what you have so far. Just one question. Can you talk to me a little bit about how long this has been going on for and what exactly you've done so far to remediate the problem? The reason this is so effective is that you've now reinserted, or what I call seeded, a strategically spontaneous question in the middle of your discovery call. And what this is going to do is further drag the customer through the pain and make them realize that their problem that they have is much more serious than they thought it was, or possibly maybe it's their own fault that they haven't solved the problem. And it's going to do another thing for you. It's going to help you understand how serious they are about solving this problem. Now, moving on to tip number 6. I think most sales reps understand and desperately try, because I know I have in my career, to generate credibility with our customers. And obviously you want to come from a position of authority. And this is incredibly important when you get into discovery calls, because this is really the first moment outside of the cold call or the email you sent or the LinkedIn message that you have an opportunity to show the customer that you know what you're talking about and why they should work with you. But it's not about telling, as we all know. It's about asking the right questions. And so one of the best ways that you can show that you do know what you're talking about is by asking questions that only an expert would know. Now, as I alluded to earlier and explained, there's something that I use called knowledge stacking, which is taking information from prior discovery calls, whether I close the deal or not, and applying it to future discovery calls with new customers and prospects so I can ask better, deeper questions. And the reason why this is so important is that you may have information that your company gives you, of course, which are basic boilerplate templated questions, and some of them may be very good. I know my company that I work for has very great questions that we can ask to determine if the customer's a fit and help diagnose the problem they have at a deeper level and find that root cause problem. But what's really, really important beyond those templated questions is really showing the customer that you understand their world and their problem at a deeper level so they trust you. And one of the ways you do that is by asking expert questions that only an expert would know so that your customer can't just quickly respond. It actually makes them think about their answer and their response rather than just quickly responding with some off-the-cuff answer. And when you make your customers think, it actually generates immense amounts of trust and credibility. It's the same thing like when you go to a doctor, and if a doctor says, well, hey, how's your diet? And most people would just say, oh, it's pretty good. But if they were to say, so tell me how your macros are in your diet. What are your macros that you're eating on a weekly basis, daily basis? How many proteins, carbs, and fats do you eat? If you don't know what that means, it's going to make you scratch your head and go, well, I don't really know. I don't track my proteins, carbs, and fats. And so therefore, I really don't know how many calories I'm eating. I don't know how much protein. I don't know if I'm eating too many carbs, too much fat, too little fat. You wouldn't know. Therefore, if someone asks you that question, you're going to start trusting that person a bit more because they're asking a deeper question. So like in my industry, if I'm selling something that's related to the cloud or cybersecurity, I might ask a question that is more prescriptive to say, for example, if it's cybersecurity, I might say, hey, so can you walk me through your entire vulnerability management process from the time a scanning tool runs a scanning report all the way through a vulnerability is identified and how that vulnerability is remediated? That's a much better question than, can you walk me through your threat and vulnerability management process, which is still a good question, still open-ended, but it's not very deep and it doesn't show as much expertise as the first question I asked. So use expert level questioning. You'll differentiate yourself. You're going to come across as an expert. You're going to build more trust. And I promise you're going to have better discovery calls. Now, moving on to tactic number 7, which is going to be our final tip for today. And tip number 7 is probably the most important tip of any, but it only works if you follow tips 1 through 6. And that is, you need to validate that you understand the problem and that your customer also feels like you could potentially help them solve that problem through your product or service, and then sell the next step by gaining a micro commitment to have the next meeting, whatever that next step. Maybe it's a demo, maybe it's a walkthrough of your proposal, whatever that next step is for you and your sales process and your organization, you have to gain that next step. If you don't get it right then and right there, your deal is going to start going sideways because you're not going to have that next step written down. And I tell you what, every time I've ever had a deal that I've sold, they always came with lots of micro commitments, and the deals that never closed, they were the ones that were a little soft. It doesn't mean the customer ghosted me. It's just that they never could really commit to a next step that had an actionable item. So for tip number 7, validate and give a summary of what you heard to the prospect and say, Mr. Customer, what I heard you telling me is this. I've seen this problem before at other customers. It sounds like this is causing XYZ problems for you and your organization based on what you told me. Is that accurate? Yes, it is. And also based on what you told me, you said you needed to get this problem solved by XYZ date. Is that right? Okay, great. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you is that at this point in the call, we usually recommend a next step. So this is the way that I typically like to sell the next step, which is super non-salesy, super not pushy. It's easy peasy, okay? Here's what you do. Instead of saying, okay, Mr. Customer, can you pull out your calendar and tell me when you can meet for that next meeting so we can discuss XYZ? Here's what I do instead to actually figure out how bought in my customer is to the next step in the sales process. And the reason why most sales reps don't do this is because they're afraid of the answer. It's really telling, because what it tells you is how great of a job you did throughout the rest of the discovery call that came before that. So when you get to the end of the discovery call, the way that you sell the next step is really important. So here's how you sell the next step, which is critically important. Now, the first thing you want to do before you sell the next step, as I mentioned, is you want to validate what you heard. And so when you validate what you heard in the discovery call, you're basically going to walk through their current situation. You're going to walk through their current pain points and problems. And then you're going to walk through what their plan is to get there and the timelines associated and any negative consequences of them not achieving that goal. And when you do that properly, it's going to set up the stage for a next step. But you first need to get commitment and get in alignment with the customer that they too feel the way and agree with what you just said. So you ask them, hey, you told me that your situation was this. You told me that the problems that were coming from that situation were this. You told me you had to get it done by this time frame and you needed a solution to fix it. Otherwise, XYZ was going to happen. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Based on all of that, we briefly talked about our product or solution. And before we get into pitching what our product or solution does, what I'd like to ask you at this juncture is this. Based on where you're sitting today, what do you think the next logical step would be in order for us to continue this discussion to determine if we can help you solve this problem further? And the reason why that's so magical is because if you did your job properly in the discovery call, your prospect is definitely going to recommend a next step. If they do not, you have objections to overcome, which might be very simple objections, like they don't really know what the next step is, and so you need to lead and direct them to the next step. And they might say, well, what do you think? And that's when your door opens to direct them to say, well, at this juncture, we would generally recommend a demo, and we would also like to bring in your executive leadership so we can gain their perspective and buy-in on the solution to make sure it's a fit for you and your organization. So that is tip number 7, my friends. I hope that helps you run better discovery calls. In fact, not I hope. Hope is not a strategy. I know it will. Follow steps 1 through 7. All of these tips are super important, and I use all of them every single day in my sales process. And I know that if you will, you're going to see massive results. Now, before you click close to end that video, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button. Please hit the notification bell. That helps out the channel as my channel is growing, and I hope you're enjoying the content. Anyways, I appreciate you watching this video. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next one.